Hello, everyone. Tonight, before we drift into the calm, gentle quiet of a late-night story, I want to invite you to settle your thoughts, breathe a little slower, and wrap yourself in whatever blanket makes you feel most at home. Because in this episode, we are traveling farther back than modern decorations, farther back than chimneys, reindeer, and even the earliest Christmas carols. We are stepping into a time before Christmas existed, before it had a name, before anyone imagined a holiday filled with trees, lights, and presents. We are wandering into the ancient world, where winter was long, cold, and often unforgiving, and where people invented celebrations not for romance or shopping or sentimentality, but simply to survive the deepest, darkest nights of the year. And somehow, that ancient survival instinct wrapped in firelight, feasting, songs, rituals, and a lot of hopeful noise eventually became the foundation of what we now call Christmas. So tonight, let us start at the true beginning, where the holiday was not yet a holiday, but a lifeline. Long before December meant cozy sweaters and glowing streets, long before it meant family gatherings and carefully wrapped gifts, it meant something very different, a season when the world seemed to fall asleep. Nights stretched longer than day. The sun sank low on the horizon, and lingered there as if unsure whether it wanted to return. The wind sharpened, crops withered, and the landscape grew quiet. For early humans centuries before electricity, heating, and supermarkets, winter was not simply an inconvenience. It was a test of endurance, a test of community, a test of hope. Every winter, people wondered if their stored food would last, if their animals would survive, if their families would see the spring. And within this cold uncertainty, something extraordinary happened. People invented light. Not just physical light, though fire was essential, but emotional light, symbolic light, ceremonial light. They created gatherings, rituals, and celebrations meant to push back against the heavy dark pressing in from every direction. They built bonfires taller than houses. They sang until their voices cracked. They feasted on whatever they still had left, as if daring the winter to do its worst. And even though they did not know it at the time, every chant, every flame, every cup raised to the heavens would become a fragment of the holiday we celebrate today. Imagine yourself standing with them. The year is ancient, so ancient that no calendar has numbers yet. The cold is sharp, the sky wide and silent, and your breath curls in front of you like thin smoke. Around you, people gather wrapped in furs, cloaks, and whatever else they could find, forming a circle around a roaring fire. This fire is not decoration. It is hope. It is warmth. It is a message to the sky that the community refuses to surrender to the season. These ancient people did not have malls or dinners or ornaments, but they did have something deeper, a shared belief that together they could outlast the longest night. That gathering, what we today might call a solstice festival, was the earliest, ancestor of Christmas. At the heart of it was the moment when the sun reached its lowest point in the sky, the winter solstice. For ancient people, this day was not merely astronomical. It was spiritual. It marked the turning point when the sun stopped shrinking away and began its slow return towards spring. They did not know the science behind it. They did not need to. All they knew was that the world's light had returned, even if only by a fraction. And that was reason enough for celebration. Fire became the symbol of this hope. Flames danced against the dark sky, and people believed that by lighting these fires, they could help coax the sun back into the world. This idea appears almost everywhere in the ancient world. In Northern Europe, large bonfires lit up snowy landscapes. In the Mediterranean, torches illuminated festivals dedicated to the renewal of light. Even in far-flung regions with no connection to each other, people invented similar rituals, proof that, across cultures, the instinct to push back against darkness is universal. Feasting was another essential part of these early celebrations. It was not about indulgence, it was necessity wrapped in joy. In many communities, the animals that could not be kept alive through winter had to be slaughtered in late December, meaning people suddenly had more food than they expected. Rather than let it spoil, they gathered to share it. Root vegetables, dried fruits, preserved grains, salted meats, everything became part of one long winter meal. People ate not because they had excess, but because they needed warmth, strength, and the encouragement of community. Eating together was a declaration that life still continued, even in the coldest season. In the midst of these gatherings, traditions develop unique to each culture, but tied by a common thread. Some communities wore animal skins or masks, representing spirits of nature or powerful beings they believed could protect them through the winter. Others danced in circles or reenacted myths about the sun's rebirth. Many believed that during the solstice, the boundary between the living world and the unseen world grew thin, so they lit lanterns and hung greenery to keep out negative forces. Evergreen branches, with their year-round color, symbolized life that refused to fade. People placed holly and ivy above doorways, believing they carried protective power. They crafted small charms, whispered blessings, or shared stories to remind each other that spring was coming. All of this, every spark of fire, every bite of preserved food, every tradition designed to push back the cold, is part of the deep roots of Christmas. We often think of the holiday as something fixed, something created in its modern form, but its earliest foundations were shaped by thousands of years of human resilience. Christmas grew not from one place, but from many. Not from one belief, but from countless expressions of the same longing, to endure, to gather, to hope. Across the ancient world, festivals of light appeared like stars. In Rome, people celebrated Saturnalia, a week-long festival filled with feasting, gift-giving, and a joyful suspension of social rules. In Northern Europe, the Norse celebrated Yule with fires, evergreen decorations, and stories of gods traveling across the winter sky. In Celtic regions, the solstice was honored with rituals guided by druids who gather mistletoe from sacred trees. Different cultures, different languages, different myths, but all centered around the same purpose, to remind themselves that light would return. Later, as religions and civilizations evolved, these winter festivals were reshaped, reinterpreted, absorbed, and combined. But their ancient emotional core stayed intact. Even today, when we put lights on trees, light candles, gather for meals, decorate our homes with evergreens, tell stories, sing songs, and wait for a special night filled with warmth, we are echoing the same behaviors that helped ancient people survive winter's depth. Without realizing it, we are participating in rituals thousands of years old. The modern holiday, wrapped around those ancient instincts, may look different: more decorations, more music, more bright colors, more cheerful notes than solemn ones, but at its heart it is the same. It is a moment when the world pauses in the cold and chooses warmth. A moment when people look into the darkness and light a flame. A moment where hope is not just an idea, but a practice. So as we begin this story together, imagine those early nights dark, quiet, and filled with the glow of firelight. Imagine the sound of ancient songs rising into the cold air. Imagine families huddled close, sharing food, sharing warmth, sharing stories. Imagine the relief they felt when the sun finally began its slow return. That feeling: relief, gratitude, wonder is the thread that stretches across centuries, tying the past to the present. Tonight, we tug gently on that thread. We follow it back to the first sparks that would eventually become Christmas. And we begin our journey not with a holiday, but with the timeless human need to illuminate the longest night. When we move from the deep, ancient solstice gatherings into the world of classical Rome, we land at a place where winter celebrations take on a new shape: bolder, louder, and far more elaborate. If the earliest solstice festivals were quiet calls for the sun's return, Saturnalia was the moment the ancient world abandoned restraint and let joy spill into the streets. And it is here, in the heart of Rome, that we find one of the most powerful influences behind modern Christmas traditions. So let us drift into that world now, slowly and gently, as if walking through an old city awakening for a festival it has been preparing for all year. Imagine the streets of Rome at the start of winter. The days are short, the air cool, and the sky holds that faint, silvery tone that appears when the sun sits low on the horizon. People bundle their cloaks tighter. Children hurry home before the darkness settles, and shopkeepers light early lamps to chase away the dimness. But then, for 1 week each year, something unusual happens. The mood changes. The lamps burn brighter. The crowds grow louder. The quiet of winter breaks open, replaced by laughter, music, warm food, and the unexpected brilliance of celebration. This is Saturnalia, a festival dedicated to Saturn, the god associated with agriculture, time, renewal, and the golden age, a mythical era when the world was simple, peaceful, and abundant. To honor that lost golden age, Romans created a celebration that deliberately blurred the boundaries of normal life. Rules were softened, customs loosened. Everyday routines dissolved as people embraced a kind of joyful chaos. Even the strict Roman social order, known for discipline and hierarchy, was temporarily turned upside down. The most striking feature was role reversal. For 1 week, the usual flow of authority loosened. Masters served meals to their household workers instead of the other way around. Workers were allowed to relax, eat freely, and speak openly, sometimes even playfully teasing the people who usually commanded them. It was not perfect equality, not by any stretch, but it was a remarkable symbolic pause, a reminder that beneath status and titles, all people shared the same human experiences. This role reversal was not just symbolic, it created a sense of release. For a few days, society pretended to return to that mythic golden age where no one ruled over another and life was easier, simpler, freer. Imagine the atmosphere, freed voices echoing down the streets, laughter rising above the rooftops, and the sweet relief of forgetting one's daily obligations. People played games, sang songs, exchanged light-hearted jokes, and wandered from house to house for shared meals. It was a celebration of community, connection, and that warm, temporary feeling of being unburdened. Feasting was at the heart of Saturnalia. Tables overflowed with bread, olives, roasted meats, honey pastries, fruits preserved from autumn, and jugs of warm, spiced drinks. Families invited friends, neighbors, and even strangers to join their meals. This openness, this willingness to share, was considered essential to the festival. Saturn, as the god of abundance, was honored through generosity. To give freely meant to welcome prosperity in the year to come. Another feature of Saturnalia that wove itself into modern Christmas was gift-giving. Unlike the elaborate presents common today, Saturnalia gifts were often small, symbolic, and heartfelt. Wax candles represented returning light. Tiny figurines represented good fortune or inside jokes. Children received toys or little trinkets. Adults exchanged personal tokens, signs of friendship, affection, or appreciation. Some gifts were humorous, some practical, some sentimental, but all were reminders that giving was a form of connection. In this way, Saturnalia reinforced something deeply human. During the darkest days of the year, the simple act of exchanging gifts could warm a home more than any fire. But Saturnalia was not only about generosity, it was also about freedom. During the festival, Romans wore bright, colorful clothing instead of their usual formal attire. Many decorated their homes with greenery, particularly ivy, symbolizing vitality during the cold season. People greeted each other with celebratory phrases and walked around with cheerful, relaxed energy. Shops closed early, courts suspended business, and even the most disciplined households paused their routines. The entire city seemed to sigh in relief, as though all of Rome had chosen to breathe more slowly for a moment. The festival also included a playful element of randomness. In many households, a temporary leader was chosen sometimes by lot called the Lord of Misrule, who presided over festivities and encouraged merry mischief. This idea of a designated holiday figure, one who sparks celebration and directs the fun, would eventually echo into later winter traditions long after Saturnalia itself faded into history. Now imagine the sounds of Saturnalia, The clatter of dice from street games, the lilting tunes of musicians playing simple instruments, the chatter of groups sharing warm drinks in the fading afternoon light. Children run with strings of small trinkets. Adults raise cups to the sky, and the city buzzes with the temporary freedom of a world turned upside down. Even though Saturnalia was very much a product of its time, its emotional core feels strikingly familiar. The desire to gather when the days grow dark. The longing to soften life's burdens with play, food, company, and warmth. The instinct to give tokens of affection. The comforting pause from everyday responsibilities. These threads run straight into the holiday season we know, today. Over centuries, as cultures blended and religions rose and fell, Saturnalia's practices did not disappear. Instead, they transformed. Gift-giving found new meaning. Feasting remained an essential part of winter. Decorative greenery persisted. And the idea that winter is a moment for joy, generosity, and social harmony survived long after the Roman Empire faded. Even the concept of turning norms upside down resurfaced across Europe in later centuries through midwinter customs involving playful role reversals, festive leaders, and spirited gatherings. Though these traditions evolve, their echoes can still be heard today in the ways certain communities celebrate with humor, storytelling, and symbolic gestures of equality and goodwill. What makes Saturnalia especially important in the story of Christmas is not just the gift-giving or the feasts, but the emotional truth at its core. Saturnalia acknowledged that winter can feel heavy, and it offered a remedy, a moment where people are encouraged to lighten their hearts together. A moment where families share not only food but laughter. A moment where society recognizes that joy is not a luxury but a necessity during the darkest weeks of the year. As we look back through the centuries, we see that Christmas did not emerge out of nowhere. It took shape slowly, drawing from many cultures. But Saturnalia contributed something specific and enduring. The idea that winter is not simply a season to endure, but a season to soften, to connect, to express generosity, and to celebrate. It gave the world a blueprint for winter joy, a blueprint we still follow, often without realizing it. And so, when you picture Rome during Saturnalia, remember that this vibrant, luminous week filled with laughter, open doors, warm lights, reversed roles, shared meals, and small, thoughtful gifts became a foundational layer beneath the holiday we know. The decorations may have changed, the names may have shifted, and the stories may have transformed, but the heart of it remains beautifully intact. Saturnalia reminds us that even in ancient times, people understood something powerful. When the world grows dark, the human spirit grows brighter. And it is that brightness, that spark of warmth carried across generations, that eventually helped shape the holiday that now glows in homes around the world. As we drift away from the lively streets of ancient Rome and its joyful, chaotic Saturnalia, our story carries us north far beyond the warm Mediterranean sun and into the colder, harsher landscapes where winter was not simply a season, but a force. If the Romans celebrated winter with laughter and colorful clothing, the Norse and early Germanic peoples faced winter with stories, fire, and rituals that blended strength with hope. Their world, carved from snow, mountains, quiet forests, and long nights, gave birth to one of the most powerful ancestors of modern Christmas, Yule. To understand Yule, picture a winter so deep that the sun barely rises. For people living in ancient Scandinavia, winter meant months of dim light, icy winds, and landscapes sleeping under blankets of snow. The nights felt endless. The days slipped by in pale, cold silence. But instead of surrendering to the gloom, these early northern communities did something remarkable. They created a celebration that turned darkness into warmth, uncertainty into connection, and fear into storytelling. Yule or Jol was not a single day. It was a season-long, powerful midwinter festival stretching for days or even weeks. It was a time when families gathered in longhouses glowing with firelight, when stories were told, when old spirits were honored, and when people reminded themselves that even the darkest nights carried a spark of life. At the heart of Yule was fire. Fire was more than heat. It was protection, memory, and magic. The blazing bonfires lit across snowy fields symbolized the sun's strength, calling it back from its weakened winter state. Flames rose into the freezing air, sparks drifting upward like tiny prayers. The Yule fires were meant to warm not only the body, but the spirit, a reminder that even when the world slept, the community's hearts still burned. And then there was the Yule, a tradition that echoes all the way into modern celebrations, though in a much gentler form. In the ancient world, the Yule log was not the small decorative piece we see today, or the chocolate cake shaped like a log at holiday dinners. It was enormous. A single massive log, often chosen with ceremony, sometimes decorated with runes or greenery, sometimes sprinkled with mead or ale before being placed in a hearth. This log burned for days, and people believed its light brought blessings, protection, and good fortune for the coming year. Its embers were collected and kept safe, used later to light next year's fire or to protect homes from misfortune. Imagine the glow of that fire inside a wooden longhouse. Snow falls softly outside, covering the earth in silence. Inside, families sit close, wrapped in furs, warm from the radiant heat of the burning log. The shadows flicker across the walls, and from somewhere in the room comes the sound of quiet storytelling tales of gods, giants, nature spirits, and the formation of the world. Because Yule was also a time of myth. In these northern traditions, the winter sky was not empty. It was alive with beings traveling across it. Some believe that Odin, the All-Father, rode across the night on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, leading a wild hunt of spirits through the winter air. Children would leave offerings of hay or grain for the horse, an ancient gesture that many historians believe later influenced the tradition of leaving treats for Santa's reindeer. The idea of a powerful figure traveling through the sky on a winter night, visiting homes, and rewarding the kind-hearted did not begin with Santa, it began with these northern tales. Yule was not only spiritual, it was deeply practical. Much like Saturnalia, involved feasting, but here the feasts carried special weight. Animals that could not be kept alive through the deepest cold had to be used now. So families gathered for meals filled with roasted meats, preserved fish, dark bread, mead, warm broth, and whatever fruits or grains had survived storage. These meals were not indulgence. They were survival rituals wrapped in joy. Around the fire, people exchanged stories and songs, passing knowledge from one generation to another. Some stories explained the creation of the world. Others taught bravery, cleverness, or resilience. Some were humorous. Others spoke of gods and spirits who watched over the long winter nights. Symbolism filled the home's evergreen branches. Holly, juniper, and mistletoe hung at the entrances or placed around the room. These plants stayed green even in winter, and to ancient people they represented endurance and protection. They were signs that life persisted, that the world had not given up. These branches, placed in homes as symbols of luck and hope, are direct ancestors of the greenery we use in holiday decor today. Outside, the world transformed into a landscape of rituals. In some villages, people lit torches and carried them through the dark fields, forming a procession of moving light across the snow. Others performed symbolic hunts or reenacted ancient legends. The community celebrated not only the return of the sun, but the strength of the human spirit facing winter together. The emotional core of Yule is something we can still feel today. The warmth of firelight in the darkest season. The comfort of gathering indoors while the world outside sleeps under frost. The instinct to decorate our homes with greenery that reminds us life persists. The desire to share food, stories, and connection. The feeling of inviting hope back into the world. Even after centuries, Yule's fingerprints remain everywhere. Today's holiday lights. They are echoes of ancient bonfires meant to guide the sun home. The Christmas tree, a towering descendant of the evergreens cherished during Yule. The Yule log cake, a sweet memory of the massive log that once burned for days. The idea of a magical figure traveling across the winter sky. A modern retelling of Odin's midwinter journey. The instinct to gather, feast, share, and reflect. Timeless. When Christianity spread through Northern Europe, many Yule traditions were not erased. They were woven into the emerging winter celebration. People did not abandon their rituals, they transformed them. They merged them with new meanings, and over generations, the two traditions fused so seamlessly that it is difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. But if we listen closely, if we let ourselves imagine the ancient longhouses, the glowing hearths, the snowy forests, the crackling flames, and the soft voices weaving stories beneath the winter sky, we can still sense Yule's original heartbeat. It tells us something simple but profound. Winter is not just a season of cold. It is a season of gathering, protecting, hoping, and remembering. A season not defined by darkness, but by the ways people light their world in spite of it. And that spirit carried across time, shaped by countless hands, became one of the most essential foundations of what we now know as Christmas. As we continue drifting through the long story of winter traditions, we shift from bonfires and mythic skies into something quieter, gentler, and deeply symbolic. Fire was the ancient world's answer to darkness, but nature offered another answer, one far older than human rituals. And that answer came in the form of the evergreen. Imagine walking through a winter forest centuries ago. The ground is muted under frost, branches stand bare, and the trees that dominated summer now seem like delicate skeletons waiting for warmth. But scattered among these sleeping forms are surprising patches of life, deep green, unwavering, shining with a quiet persistence. Pine, fir, spruce, holly, ivy, and mistletoe. Plants that refuse to fade even when winter tightens its grip. To ancient people, these plants were more than just greenery. They were symbols. Proof that when the world appeared, lifeless, life still breathed beneath the cold. Proof that endurance was possible. Proof that nature still held its power even in the darkest months. And so, evergreens became companions in winter. They appeared in stories, in rituals, in the corners of longhouses, and above doorways. They transformed from simple plants into messengers of hope. Take holly, for example. With its glossy leaves and bright red berries, it stood out vividly against the pale winter landscapes. People believed its sharp leaves protected the home from unwelcome spirits, and that the berries carried a spark of life when everything else seemed empty. Hanging holly above a door was like saying, no matter how cold it becomes, life stands guard here. Ivy, with its delicate tendrils and ability to cling and climb even through winter, symbolized resilience. It grew in places where other plants could not survive, weaving itself across stones, and would like a reminder that determination can find a way even in harsh conditions. In many regions, ivy was placed inside homes to encourage harmony, growth, and continuity. And then there was mistletoe, the strangest and most mysterious of all. Unlike the others, mistletoe did not grow from the earth. It grew suspended in the air, attached to the branches of trees, as if it existed between worlds. To the Celts, this made mistletoe sacred. They believed it carried healing, luck, and protection. Druids harvested it with ceremony, cutting it with golden tools and catching it before it touched the ground. It was hung in homes as a symbol of peace. Anyone passing beneath it was to treat each other with kindness. This ancient symbolism, built long before Christmas existed, still echoes in the modern tradition of mistletoe, though now the emphasis has softened into affectionate gestures and playful moments. These evergreens were not merely decorations, they were messages. They said, life does not disappear in winter. Strength does not vanish. Hope does not die. It endures quietly, patiently, waiting for spring. As human societies grew and winter traditions evolved, these green branches became part of the seasonal rhythm. People brought them indoors for warmth, not physical warmth, but emotional warmth. A long house, a cottage, or even a stone hut felt less lonely with life inside it. Evergreens turned cold rooms into hopeful spaces. Picture an ancient home during midwinter. A fire crackles, sending shadows dancing across the wooden walls. The wind presses against the roof. Outside, silence stretches across the snow. But inside, the air smells of pine. Holly glints in the firelight. Ivy wraps gently around beams. The greenery's presence softens the night. It brings comfort in a way that words cannot. Over generations, the symbolism grew. People began to assign deeper meaning to these plants, each leaf, each berry carrying a quiet story. Evergreen boughs were woven into wreaths, hung above doors, placed near hearths, or laid on tables. In Northern Europe, some families built entire winter rituals around the gathering of greenery. Children would go into the forest with their parents to search for the freshest branches, returning with hands cold but hearts warm from the shared tradition. Slowly, the idea started forming: if a few branches could bring hope, what if an entire tree could be brought indoors? Early versions of this practice appeared long before what we now call a Christmas tree. In some regions, people cut small evergreen branches and set them upright in the ground or indoors as symbols of life. In others, they decorated trees outside, leaving offerings for the spirits or simply celebrating the enduring presence of green in a lifeless winter. It was not until many centuries later that the Christmas tree developed in its recognizable form, but the seed of the idea, the emotional spark, was already there. The impulse to bring a symbol of unbroken life into the home during the coldest season was ancient. Evergreens also played a protective role. In many cultures, it was believed that winter was a time when unseen forces moved more freely. Not necessarily dangerous forces, but mysterious ones. Evergreen branches served as guardians, barriers of life, and strength placed at entryways. Even after the myths faded, people kept the tradition. They no longer spoke of winter spirits openly, but the decorations remained. There is something deeply human about the act of decorating with evergreens. It is gentle but powerful, simple but meaningful. Without realizing it, we still practice a version of an instinct that began thousands of years ago. When the world grows dark, we bring green inside. Even today, in modern apartments, suburban houses, and city high-rises, evergreen symbolism endures. Wreaths on doors, garlands on staircases, pine-scented candles, branches arranged on tables. And of course, the tree standing like a quiet guardian in the center of the room. The shapes have changed. The lighting has changed. The meaning has expanded. But the heart of the tradition is the same. It says, even in the coldest season, life remains. Even when the sun hides, we honor its return. Even as the world outside sleeps, hope stays awake. This emotional truth is why evergreen symbolism traveled so easily through time, across cultures, and into the celebration that eventually became Christmas. When Christianity spread through Europe, it did not erase the ancient connection to evergreens. Instead, it adopted it. The plants lost some of their older mystical stories, but they gained new layers of meaning. Churches used greenery during winter services. Households continued to decorate. Communities held winter gatherings that blended old and new customs. And so, what began as ancient symbols of protection and endurance gradually became part of a unified winter celebration, one that carried both spiritual significance and emotional comfort. Even now, when we place greenery in our homes, we are echoing a pattern older than any written history. A pattern made by people who looked at the winter world, felt its weight, and answered it with quiet beauty. Because sometimes a single green branch is enough to remind us that the darkest months are only temporary. Sometimes a wreath on the door is enough to say, hope lives here. And sometimes the simple act of decorating with evergreens is not decoration at all, but a whisper passed down from our ancestors. Spring will come back. Light will return. Hold on. Stay warm. Stay together. As we wander deeper into the ancient winter world, we arrive at one of the most mysterious symbols of a season, one that hangs quietly above doorways, inspires gentle gestures, and carries a history far older than the holiday it is now tied to. Long before it became a soft, playful decoration associated with affection and warmth, mistletoe was a sacred plant wrapped in awe, fear, reverence, and ritual. To understand why mistletoe became such an enduring part of winter tradition, we have to step into a world of forests, ancient beliefs, and the people who saw the natural world not as scenery, but as a living, breathing presence filled with meaning. Imagine a winter forest centuries ago. The trees stand bare, their branches stripped of leaves by cold winds. The ground lies frozen, muffled under a thin sheet of snow. Life seems to have paused. Yet above, clinging to the highest branches, something strange grows green, alive, and blooming where nothing else dares. A plant that does not root in the soil. A plant that grows suspended in air. Mistletoe. To the ancient Celts and the Druidic traditions of Northern Europe, this alone made mistletoe extraordinary. Plants were expected to rise from the earth, fed by the soil. But mistletoe broke that rule, growing from the limbs of oak trees already considered powerful and sacred. That combination, a sacred tree hosting a plant that seemed to defy nature, was enough to elevate mistletoe into a symbol touched by forces beyond understanding. Druids believed mistletoe held life force, a kind of concentrated vitality capable of healing, protecting, and blessing those who received it. They used it carefully, respectfully, always with ceremony. Imagine a druid gathering ritual, robed figures entering the quiet forest at dawn, carrying golden sickles, moving with slow, purposeful steps. They approached mistletoe not as a plant to be harvested, but as a gift to be accepted. No part of the ritual was rushed. No movement was careless. To cut mistletoe, they used tools made without iron, believing that metal interfered with natural purity. They spread white cloth beneath the tree so that when the plant fell, it would never touch the ground. This detail mattered deeply. If mistletoe touched the earth, its power was believed to fade. To ancient communities, this ritual was not superstition, it was survival. Mistletoe was medicine, charm, protector, and symbol all at once. Those beliefs grew from observation. Mistletoe stayed green through the hardest winters. It produced berries while other plants slept. Birds gathered around it when food elsewhere was scarce. To people who lived close to the cycles of nature, these signs meant something. They read the world through the language of plants, animals, sky, and seasons, and mistletoe's defiance of winter made it feel like a small miracle. Once harvested, mistletoe was carried into the community with great care. Pieces were hung above doorways to protect homes from misfortune. People believed that mischief, bad luck, or wandering spirits could not pass beneath mistletoe's shadow. Branches were placed near hearths, in barn rafters, or on altars during winter celebrations. Small sprigs were given to families hoping for peace or healing. In some villages, people even wore tiny pieces of mistletoe as charms during cold months. The plant's symbolism softened hearts during winter. It was said that beneath mistletoe, no weapon could be raised, no argument could continue, and no conflict could escalate. This idea of mistletoe as a place of peace lingered so strongly that even warring tribes were rumored to pause their disputes if they happened to meet near mistletoe. This belief in peace gave mistletoe a quiet, gentle power. Imagine two rivals encountering each other on a snowy forest path, both weary, both determined. They look up and see mistletoe overhead not as decoration, but as a sign. A reminder that winter is a time when life itself struggles, when survival depends on cooperation, not conflict. And so, beneath the mistletoe, they lower their voices, They breathe. They walk away in peace. Generations passed, and mistletoe's reputation grew. It became known not only for peace, but also for healing. Healers used it in small doses to ease winter ailments, calm anxiety, or bring comfort during long nights. Villagers placed pieces of it under pillows to ward off bad dreams. Parents hung sprigs above cradles as symbols of protection. Couples exchanged mistletoe in hopes of harmony. Farmers believed that placing mistletoe in barns would keep animals healthy through the freezing months. But even as these traditions continued, the world around them changed. Cultures blended. Religions evolved. Empires rose and fell. And yet mistletoe stayed quiet, green, gentle, moving from one generation's winter rituals into the next. Eventually, as Christianity spread through Northern Europe, the older meanings of mistletoe softened, transformed, and wove themselves into new traditions. The belief in its power to bring peace gradually evolved into something more tender, an invitation for kindness, goodwill, and gentle connection. Over time, this idea shifted again, becoming the modern custom of sharing a brief moment of affection beneath the mistletoe. This change did not happen suddenly. It happened slowly, through centuries of storytelling and reimagining. In some regions, people began to say that mistletoe carried blessings for couples who shared a kind gesture beneath it. In others, the plant became associated with hope for new beginnings or reconciliation after disagreements. What had once been a symbol of truce became a symbol of affection. By the time the Victorian era arrived, an especially influential period for shaping modern holiday customs, mistletoe had fully transitioned into a decoration associated with warmth, romance, and soft emotions. Victorian households hung mistletoe at gatherings, not because they believed in druidic rituals, but because they cherished the sweetness of the tradition. A moment beneath mistletoe was seen as a small pause in the holiday, a place where people could laugh, forgive, reconnect, or simply feel a little closer to someone they cared about. Today, mistletoe appears in homes with twinkling lights, wreaths, gatherings, and gentle celebrations. It no longer carries the weight of ancient ceremony. It no longer requires golden sickles or forest rituals. But the heart of its symbolism remains remarkably stable. It still represents peace. It still represents hope. It still represents connection in the darkest season of the year. What has changed is the form, not the feeling. And that is the theme of winter traditions across time, old symbols shifting into new shapes without losing their emotional truth. When we hang mistletoe today, we probably do not think about druids cutting it at dawn or ancient families carrying it home as protection. But the feeling it brings, the softening, the kindness, the little spark of joy, is the same feeling people sought thousands of years ago. And perhaps that is why mistletoe endures. Because winter is easier when people choose gentleness. Because long nights feel shorter when we share warmth. Because each of us, in our own way, still needs small symbols that remind us of peace when the world grows cold. In that sense, hanging mistletoe is not just decoration, is continuity, a whisper from the past carried across centuries, reminding us that even the smallest piece of greenery can turn winter into something warmer, brighter, and more human. As our journey moves from deep forests and ancient rituals into the shifting tides of history, we arrive at a turning point, one of the most significant transformations in the long story of winter traditions. It is the moment when different worlds began to merge, when old beliefs and new faiths intertwined, and when the quiet, enduring instincts of humanity were woven into a holiday that continues to glow through time. To understand how Christmas found its place in the calendar, we have to step into a century marked by transition, by change, and by an extraordinary act of cultural blending. Picture the world in the early centuries of the Common Era. Empires rise and fall. Ideas spread across mountains, seas, and deserts. New faiths take root, shaping identities and communities. Among these, the early Christian movement begins to grow, first in small gatherings, then across cities, then through entire nations. As Christianity expands into regions with deep, ancient winter traditions, places shaped by solstice rituals, Saturnalia feasts, Yule celebrations, and countless local customs, the leaders of the early church face a dilemma. How can they guide people toward a new spiritual path without tearing them away from the seasonal rituals that define their lives? The answer did not come through force or rejection. It came through blending, through understanding, through acknowledging something essential. People needed their winter celebrations. They needed light in the dark. They needed warmth in the cold. They needed togetherness when the world outside felt distant and silent. And so, the early Christian church made a choice that would shape history. They placed the celebration of the birth of Jesus on December 25th. There's no historical record that pinpoints this date as the actual birth date of Jesus. The choice was symbolic. It aligned with the winter solstice, already a powerful moment for countless cultures. By choosing this date, the church offered people a way to honor both their deep-rooted winter traditions and their new spiritual identity. It was a bridge, not a barrier. Imagine being a family in that era. Your grandparents celebrated Saturnalia, or your parents grew up with stories of ancient winter rituals, and now you are welcoming a new kind of celebration. But the timing feels familiar. The lights feel familiar. The greenery, the gatherings, the feasting, none of it is taken away. Instead, the meaning expands. The joy deepens. The winter season becomes a moment not only of survival and hope, but also of spiritual renewal. This blending was gentle. It allowed ancient traditions to continue, reshaped through a new lens. Fire remained a symbol not of returning sunlight, but of divine light. Evergreen branches no longer represented the spirits of nature, but instead became reminders of eternal life. Feasts continued, transforming from celebrations of earthly abundance into moments of gratitude and unity. The season still carried magic, but now that magic was described in new language. Across the Roman world, people who once celebrated Saturnalia began participating in decorated winter gatherings that honored the birth story. In Northern Europe, communities who once honored Yule continued their fires. Feasts and evergreens, now infused with new spiritual significance. The transition was not abrupt. It was fluid, shaped by the rhythms of human emotion and the universal desire for meaning in the darkest days of the year. For many centuries, Christmas did not exist as we know it now. It grew slowly, an evolving tapestry stitched from older threads. Each region added something. Italy brought nativity storytelling. Germany brought greenery traditions. England added carols. Scandinavia contributed light festivals. The Celtic world brought mistletoe and evergreen symbolism. The result was a holiday that did not erase the past, but harmonized it. In this blending, something remarkable happened. Christmas became a universal moment not bound by empire, language, or geography. It carried the memories of families who sat around fires in stone homes, the rituals of ancient healers, the songs of Roman streets, the quiet prayers of early churches, and the hopes of people who simply needed something bright in the darkest weeks of the year. Imagine a winter night in the 4th century. Outside, the wind moves softly through olive groves or across northern hills. Inside a small stone building, families gather, candles flickering against the walls. A quiet reading of a birth story is shared. Children sit close, absorbing the warmth of the moment. In another region, perhaps far to the north, people burn a large log there. You'll fire while telling stories of a holy child. Even farther east, evergreen branches decorate small chapels while families share warm bread and fruit preserved months earlier. Across these distant places, different rituals begin to share a heartbeat. And that heartbeat is simple light returning. For Christians, the birth of Jesus symbolized spiritual light entering the world. For ancient cultures, the solstice symbolized sunlight returning to the sky. For many people living through harsh winters, warmth symbolized life continuing. These layers did not conflict. They intertwined. And through that intertwining, Christmas found its place not as a replacement of older traditions, but as their evolution. It is easy, from the outside, to imagine that a holiday emerges suddenly. But Christmas did not. It grew like a vine weaving through centuries, carried by families, shaped by communities, softened by storytellers, and guided by the rhythms of nature. The early church did not invent winter joy. It embraced it. It gave existing celebrations a new frame, a new narrative, a new sense of purpose. And people embraced it because it felt familiar, comforting, and meaningful. Over time, December 25th became a shared moment across cultures. Churches lit candles that symbolized hope. Families decorated homes with greenery. Communities shared meals, songs, and gifts. The season became one of reflection, gratitude, and connection. And all the while, the old traditions lived beneath the surface, not erased, but transformed. Even today, when we light candles, gather around tables, decorate our homes, or reflect on kindness and hope, we are participating in a ritual built from countless layers of human history. A ritual that began long before calendars existed. A ritual that stitched together the beliefs of farmers, warriors, villagers, healers, emperors, monks, kings, merchants, artists, and families. And beneath every modern celebration is that quiet moment when early Christian leaders looked at the world around them, the bonfires, the evergreens, the feasts, the stories, and understood something timeless. People need winter celebrations. They need warmth when the days grow short. They need meaning when the world feels cold. They need a gathering point for hope. And by choosing December 25th, the church did not impose a new idea onto the season. They embraced what already lived in people's hearts. That decision, humble, strategic, symbolic, became the spark that allowed Christmas to travel across centuries, across continents, across languages, and into the modern world. And it reminds us that holidays are not just dates on a calendar. They are living things shaped by human emotion, human resilience, and human longing. So when we look at December 25th now, we are not just seeing a single moment. We are seeing thousands of years of winter stories braided into one. We are seeing bonfires, evergreen forests, Roman streets, Druidic rituals, and early churches, all layered atop one another. We are seeing history held in place by the enduring human need for light in darkness. And that is why Christmas feels timeless, because in many ways it truly is. As we move forward along the long, winding path of winter traditions, the world around us changes once again. Empires fade, new kingdoms rise. Languages split and merge, and daily life transforms into something at once harsher and more structured. We have stepped into medieval Europe, a time lit by candlelight, shaped by village life, and paced by the slow turning of the seasons. And here, in this world of stone churches, timber houses, muddy market squares, forests alive with quiet stories, and communities bound tightly together by necessity, the winter season grows into something vibrant, layered, and beautifully extended, a festival not of one night, but of 12 days. To understand the medieval winter, picture a village tucked into the landscape, roofs covered in frost, smoke rising into the pale sky from dozens of hearths. The roads are quieter now. The fields sleep under blankets of snow. The community knows that the hardest weeks of the year lie ahead. And because they know this, they prepare not just physically with stored grain, salted meats, preserved fruits, and firewood, but emotionally. Winter must be softened. Winter must be brightened. Winter must be filled with rituals that remind people of light, warmth, and continuity. And so the medieval celebration of Christmas and the long festival that followed it became a cornerstone of winter survival. The season began with Advent, a period of reflection and anticipation. For weeks before Christmas, families prepared spiritually and mentally for the coming celebration. They fasted, prayed, and gathered in small candlelit churches where the air smelled of wax and winter air. Advent was a time of quiet, gentle expectation, like the drawing of breath before a long, warm exhale. Then came Christmas Day, not yet the most elaborate day of the season, but an important one, a day of joy, worship, and the first feast after long fasting. Little by little, households filled with warmth. Fires burned brightly. Bells rang across snowy fields. Neighbors exchanged small gestures of goodwill. And almost as soon as Christmas Day ended, the real celebration began. The medieval winter festival stretched across the 12 days of Christmas, a concept we still echo today in song, but rarely experience in its original form. These were days of open doors, shared meals, wandering singers, lively gatherings, and traditions that blended ancient customs with Christian symbolism so seamlessly that no one questioned where one ended and the other began. In many communities, the first days after Christmas were filled with feasting, not in the lavish modern sense, but as a release from long weeks of restraint. People cooked hearty stews, roasted meats, baked spice breads, and shared ale or warm drinks sweetened with honey or herbs. Families visited one another, carrying baskets of food through snowy lanes. The poorest households received gifts from the wealthier ones. Everyone, regardless of status, was meant to experience warmth and fullness. This generosity flowed naturally into another tradition, caroling. Today, caroling is seen as a gentle, polite activity, small groups singing familiar songs at the doorstep. But medieval caroling was something far more lively. Entire groups roamed the villages with drums, fiddles, flutes, or simply their own voices, moving from house to house like wandering rivers of sound. Their songs were not always solemn. Many were playful, humorous, even mischievous. Carolers were welcomed with food, drink, and small tokens of gratitude. In some places, refusing hospitality to carolers was considered socially unacceptable. From this tradition grew another beloved winter custom, wassailing. To wassail originally meant to share a drink of warmth, often a hot, spiced ale or cider from a communal bowl, while offering blessings for health, luck, and prosperity. Families would gather around a large cup, raising it with laughter, clinking wooden mugs, or sharing heartfelt wishes for the year to come. In some regions, groups of wassailers roamed the orchards at night, singing to the trees, tapping the trunks gently, or offering the first sip of warm drink to the roots, believing that this ritual would ensure a strong harvest in the coming year. It was part celebration, part agricultural magic, part winter poetry. These 12 days also carried moments of joyful social inversion, echoes of Saturnalia, and other ancient festivals. Medieval society was strict hierarchies defined nearly every interaction. But during this season, those rules loosened. In many places, a child or a humble villager was chosen as the Lord of Misrule, a symbolic figure who presided over the festivities with humor, light mischief, and a spirit of play. Under this temporary rule, daily order softened. People laughed more easily. Small jokes were forgiven. Harsh routines melted into light-hearted gatherings. This inversion was not rebellion. It was release, a moment for people who lived demanding, exhausting lives to breathe. It was the community acknowledging a simple truth: even the strictest structures must bend sometimes for the heart to remain whole. Inside homes, winter nights became places of coziness and storytelling. Families gathered around the hearth, children leaning against parents, elders recounting stories of ancient heroes, miracles, spirits, or folklore carried across generations. These stories were not mere entertainment, they were survival. In a world without modern distractions, storytelling was the anchor that held communities together. It passed down wisdom. It strengthened bonds. It brought warmth to long nights. As the 12 days continued, each had its own small customs: church services for some, household rituals for others, and community gatherings that gradually shifted in tone from festive to reflective. The final day, 12th night, was often marked by a last, joyful celebration before the long winter continued. Cakes were baked with hidden tokens inside. Whoever found certain objects in their slice might be crowned the evening's temporary king or queen of the festivities. Children loved the unpredictability. Adults enjoyed the laughter and symbolism. Even though the medieval world could be harsh, marked by disease, hard labor, limited comforts, the winter season allowed people to reclaim something essential: joy. Not extravagant joy, but warm, steady, shared joy. Joy that softened the edges of winter. Joy that reminded people that they still belonged to one another, no matter how cold the nights became. The medieval 12-day festival was not one holiday. It was a journey. It moved from anticipation to celebration, from community to reflection, from laughter to gratitude. It wove together silence and music, prayer and feasting, structure and freedom. And through this long, gentle ritual, people found strength to face the rest of winter. Much of what we think of as the holiday season today comes from this medieval foundation. The idea of an extended celebration, the importance of gathering, the connection between song, food, and light, even the soft, magical feeling that hovers over the final week of the year, the sense that time slows, that life becomes more tender, comes directly from this era. And yet the beauty of it all is how natural it felt to the people living it. They did not see themselves as creating history. They were simply doing what winter required, finding warmth where there was cold, finding joy where there was hardship, finding togetherness where there was isolation, and finding light in a season when the sun seemed to hide. The medieval winter festival, with its 12 days of gentle transformation, stands as one of the most vivid chapters in the story of Christmas. It carried forward the spirit of ancient celebrations, added new meaning, and created customs that still glow in homes, songs, gatherings, and hearts today. As the medieval winter season deepened, the celebrations that had begun with gentle candlelight and quiet anticipation transformed into something far more animated, unpredictable, and wonderfully human. If the 12 days of Christmas were the bones of the season, then the entertainment that filled them was its heartbeat, warm, chaotic, unpolished, and infinitely full of life. Medieval people did not simply observe the holiday. They inhabited it, making each day an unfolding performance of humor, improvisation, ritual, and shared joy. Their world did not have theaters, cinemas, dance halls, or modern stages. But what they did have was an abundance of creativity, a deep need for distraction from winter's harshness, and a cultural instinct for turning the ordinary into spectacle. And so medieval holiday entertainment became a lively, messy tapestry woven from songs, games, storytelling, feasts, performances, and community gatherings that felt more like miniature carnivals than anything solemn or subdued. One of the most iconic forms of entertainment was the nativity play, though not the polished, carefully scripted version we think of today. Medieval nativity plays were closer to spontaneous community theater, rough around the edges, filled with improvisation, and packed with moments that could swing from the reverent to the hilariously off script in the blink of an eye. Imagine a small village with snow drifting across the fields, the church bells chiming through the cold air, and townspeople gathering in a large hall or churchyard, huddled together in cloaks and woolen layers. The priest or village leader assigns roles: Mary, Joseph, shepherds, angels, wise men, and sometimes animals represented by costumes made of old burlap, mismatched cloth, or anything that could be draped, tied, or repurposed. 2 unlucky volunteers might be assigned to share a donkey costume stitched together from scraps. There are no formal rehearsals, no written scripts, no guaranteed delivery of lines. Instead, the cast leans on whatever memory they have, interpreting the story with sincerity, but also with a healthy amount of good humor. Children whisper cues to their parents. Villagers nod encouragingly from the sidelines. Someone forgets a major line and replaces it with whatever comes to mind. Joseph sneezes in the hay. An angel loses a halo. And inevitably, a dog escapes from somewhere in the crowd and wanders onto the stage at the most dramatic moment, stealing the show with perfect comedic timing. Yet despite the chaos, the Nativity play always finds its heart. There is something beautifully moving about people recreating a sacred story with such earnestness, something intimate, communal, and deeply human. For many, watching the play was a reminder of hope in a difficult season, a comforting story retold with warmth. Outside of the plays, the village was alive with rowdy, high-spirited caroling, nothing like the polite doorstep performances of today. Groups of singers, often accompanied by makeshift instruments, drums crafted from stretched hide, flutes carved from bone, battered fiddles, or even pots and pans roamed through the winding paths of the village, bringing noise and joy to every home they approached. Their songs were sometimes solemn, but more often they were lively, humorous, or even slightly cheeky. Medieval carolers were not shy about improvising verses that teased local personalities, commented on village gossip, or gently poked fun at neighbors. And the louder they sang, the more generously households were expected to reward them. Hospitality was not optional. Refusing carolers could bring social consequences, whispered rumors, or worse, playful threats wrapped slyly inside song lyrics. A household might be warned through a rhyme that their cabbages would wilt or their luck would sour if they turned the singers away empty-handed. This playful pressure ensured that every home offered something warm: drink, a slice of pie, a handful of nuts, or at the very least, a smile and a few kind words. A closely related tradition, wassailing, blended song, ritual, drink, and blessing into a traveling celebration. Groups of wassailers carried bowls filled with warm spiced ale or cider and shared it with villagers as both a gift and a symbol of good fortune. They sang blessings for the household, raising their voices above the winter wind. In orchard regions, these blessings extended to the trees themselves. Wassailers wandered among the fruit trees, tapping trunks gently with sticks, singing to the branches, and sometimes offering a spoonful of warm drink to the roots, an old belief intended to awaken the trees and inspire a fruitful harvest months later. This blending of practicality, superstition, and community celebration gave medieval winter entertainment an almost magical quality. Behind the noise and laughter was a core of shared hope, a desire to keep spirits high, to defy the cold, and to remind one another that spring would eventually return. The feasts themselves were another form of entertainment. Long tables filled every hall and home, covered with dishes both familiar and unusual. People gathered shoulder to shoulder, telling stories, exchanging jokes, and playing small games while eating dishes that were sometimes hearty, sometimes peculiar, and occasionally daring. Mystery pies, spiced stews, and roasted meats offered both nourishment and delight. The feast was not merely about food, it was about spectacle. The arrival of a dish like a roasted boar's head or an elaborately decorated pie evoked gasps, laughter, and admiration. Songs were sometimes written to celebrate certain dishes. Games were played between courses. Friendly teasing filled the air. Laughter bounced off the wooden beams. And naturally, with food came games of every kind. Some were quiet riddle contests, storytelling challenges, or simple guessing games. Others were much more energetic. Wrestling matches in the snow. Balancing contests using mugs or spoons. Blindfolded chases around the courtyard. Children playing tag between the legs of adults. Even small, informal competitions: who could carve the neatest slice of meat, who could tell the funniest joke, who could finish their ale without spilling a drop, became part of the evening's fun. In larger towns or wealthier manors, the lord of misrule added an extra layer of entertainment. This temporary ruler of chaos, chosen for humor rather than status, orchestrated pranks, mock proclamations, and playful inversions of social order. The most solemn villager might be commanded to sing a silly song. The most respected elder might be crowned with ivy and declared the king or queen of jokes. Priests, lords, and servants alike were drawn into the harmless mischief. Laughter bridged the social divides that structured the rest of the year. Yet what is most remarkable about medieval entertainment is not its extravagance, because it was not extravagant, but its ability to turn limited resources into unforgettable moments. A lantern became a star. A loaf of bread became a prop. A cluster of neighbors became an audience. And a few sprigs of evergreen transformed an ordinary hall into a festive gathering place. The entertainment of medieval winter was not about spectacle for its own sake. It was a way for people living hard lives to create moments of brightness. It was a way to reaffirm community ties, to soften the coldest season with warmth that came not from fire, but from togetherness. It was an assertion of life in the face of long nights and uncertain futures. And every song, every play, every joke, every feast carried the same message. We are still here. We are still together. And we will make it through. As we follow the long thread of winter traditions through history, moving from ancient rituals into the medieval world, the story glows with warmth bonfires, feasts, music, mischief, and the unmistakable desire for light in darkness. But then, suddenly, the thread encounters a sharp knot. A moment when joy is questioned. A moment when celebration itself is seen as suspicious. A moment when a winter festival, so cherished across cultures, is nearly extinguished by a group who believe that the season's noise, color, and laughter were dangerously out of control. This is the era of the Puritans, a group who emerged in the 1600s in England and later in parts of colonial America, carrying with them a strict vision of religious purity, order, and discipline. And in their eyes, Christmas, the holiday that blended ancient rituals, medieval customs, and community joy, had strayed too far from what they believed was spiritually appropriate. To understand their perspective, imagine the cultural landscape of the time. The medieval world had faded. Feasts grew grander. Street celebrations became louder. Wassailing, caroling, and public revelry sometimes spilled into unruly behavior. Bakeries sold special Christmas treats. Markets filled with greenery. Theaters performed festive plays. Churches hosted elaborate services with music and ceremony. To most people, this was the heart of winter, a season of warmth, celebration, and tradition. But to Puritan leaders, it looked like disorder, excess, indulgence, and worst of all, it looked like a holiday with too many ties to older, pre-Christian customs. The Puritans believed that anything associated with outdated rituals, even if transformed into new meanings, was spiritually dangerous. They distrusted decoration, song, theatrical play, feasting, joy-making, and anything that felt too worldly. They preferred quiet, plain devotion. And so, they set out to reshape winter entirely. One of their most striking actions came in 1647, when the English Parliament, strongly influenced by Puritan leadership, passed a law banning Christmas. Not discouraging it, not reshaping it, banning it. The legislation prohibited church services related to Christmas, outlawed festive gatherings, and forbade decorations, including holly, ivy, and any form of greenery. Shops and markets were required to stay open on December 25th, as if it were any ordinary day. Patrols roamed the streets to look for signs of celebration. Imagine waking on a December morning and looking out your window to find the streets no longer filled with wreaths and winter ornaments, but instead with watchful guards ready to question anyone whose home smelled of a special feast or whose doorway displayed even a single sprig of greenery. Imagine being told that singing a seasonal song could be seen as resistance. Imagine the silence. The ban did not erase centuries of tradition, but it did force winter celebrations into the shadows. Families who longed to keep the spirit alive had to do so behind closed doors, gathering quietly at night, whispering old songs instead of singing them aloud, cooking holiday dishes in secret. Even for those who supported strict discipline, the coldness of a winter without joy felt heavy. The ban eventually sparked resistance. In London, groups of ordinary citizens staged small protests, decorating doorways with greenery as acts of defiance. Shopkeepers refused to keep their doors open. Families insisted on preparing seasonal meals. To many, the ban felt like an erasure of something deeply human, not just a holiday, but the emotional ritual of surviving winter together. Across the Atlantic, in the American colonies, particularly in Puritan Massachusetts, similar restrictions emerged. Christmas was not legally banned in every region, but in Puritan communities it was strongly discouraged. Schools and government offices stayed open. Children were expected to attend lessons. Businesses operated normally. Anyone found indulging in festive activities might be fined. This strict approach created a strange contrast. While Europe slowly restored its celebrations after the Puritan influence faded, some American settlements held on to the restrictive mindset for decades. It would not be until the 1800s that Christmas became widely recognized in the United States, shaped by new waves of immigrants who brought their own traditions: German trees, Dutch legends, English feasts, Scandinavian candles, Irish songs. These traditions eventually softened the older Puritan attitudes. But in the 1600s, for a brief moment, winter stood at a cultural crossroads. The Puritans saw themselves as protectors of spiritual purity, believing that celebration distracted from devotion. Yet those who resisted believed just as strongly that celebration was essential to spiritual and emotional well-being, that joy itself could be sacred. And this tension reveals something important about the evolution of Christmas. The holiday has always balanced between structure and spontaneity, seriousness and celebration, devotion and delight. It has always needed a little discipline and a little mischief, a little reflection and a little cheer. Too much of one side disturbs the balance. The Puritan ban reminds us what winter looks like without celebration, function without warmth, routine without pause, life without ceremony. A world where December feels no different from any other month, and the emotional rhythm that once carried people through the darkest weeks is abruptly silenced. Yet the ban also shows us something else: the resilience of human tradition. Even when forbidden, people find ways to keep their seasonal rituals alive. They hide their greenery. They sing in whispers. They bake quietly at night. They pass down stories of older holidays to their children, ensuring the light is never fully extinguished. Winter traditions survive because they answer a timeless need. When nights are long, people seek light. When the world turns cold, people seek warmth. When the year ends, people seek connection, gratitude, and renewal. No law, no matter how strict, can erase those instincts. In the end, the Puritan ban faded. The English monarchy was restored in 1660, and one of the first cultural shifts was the return of Christmas. People brought greenery back into their homes. Churches reopened their December services. Carolers returned to the streets. Wassailers lifted their bowls again. Joy returned almost instantly, as if it had been waiting just behind the door. Over time, the memory of the ban became a curious chapter in the long history of winter, a moment when the holiday was almost silenced, only to come back brighter, sturdier, more cherished than ever. Today, when we decorate with holly, sing songs, share meals, gather with loved ones, or take a quiet moment to appreciate the glow of lights in the cold, we are continuing something that survived even its most difficult test. We are keeping alive a tradition that refused to disappear. And perhaps the Puritans, without meaning to, helped strengthen the holiday by showing people just how much it meant. The modern season, full of gentleness, togetherness, generosity, and warmth, is not simply a celebration. It is a triumph of human spirit over coldness, both literal and emotional. It is proof that joy will always find its way back, no matter how tightly someone tries to shut the door against it. As our long journey through winter traditions continues, a warm golden light appears on the horizon, aglow not from bonfires or Yule logs, but from parlors filled with candles, fireplaces trimmed with evergreen, and families gathering for a holiday that suddenly looks familiar. We have arrived in the Victorian era, a time when Christmas transformed from a seasonal collection of folk customs into the holiday we know today. If, Earlier centuries built the foundation of winter celebration. The Victorians built its home complete with decorated trees, sentimental rituals, handwritten cards, festive crackers, and stories that wrapped the season in tenderness. To understand why the Victorians reinvented Christmas so dramatically, we need to step into the rhythms of their lives. This was an era shaped by enormous change, industrial cities rising from soot and steel, trains shrinking distances that had once felt unimaginable, families shifting from rural simplicity to urban complexity, and society grappling with new technologies, new morals, and new identities. In the midst of all this upheaval, the world felt fast, uncertain, and often overwhelming. People longed for warmth, meaning, and moments that felt timeless. Christmas became the answer. Before the Victorian era, the holiday had existed, but it was not yet the glowing, sentimental season we recognize. It was uneven, celebrated with enthusiasm in some places, quietly ignored in others. But the Victorians, with their deep love of nostalgia, domestic comfort, and emotional expression, reshaped Christmas into something universal, heartfelt, and beautifully structured. One of the most iconic additions came from the influence of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German-born husband. In Germany, decorating a tree for Christmas was an old tradition, but when the royal family placed a decorated tree in Windsor Castle and an illustration of it was published in a popular magazine, the entire nation suddenly embraced the idea. What had once been a regional custom became the centerpiece of the Victorian holiday. Imagine a Victorian parlor on a December evening. Lamplight glows softly against patterned wallpaper. Children sit cross-legged on the floor, watching as parents place candles carefully and nervously onto the branches of a freshly cut tree, standing proudly in the center of the room. Each candle flickers like a tiny star. The tree is adorned with handmade ornaments, paper chains, strings of berries, windswept ribbons, small toys, and gilded nuts. The room smells of evergreen and warm fire. A sense of enchantment fills the air. This was the Victorian Christmas tree, delicate, intimate, and deeply symbolic, a celebration of family, creativity, and shared beauty. Another beloved invention was the Christmas card, introduced in the 1840s. Before this, people might write letters during the season, but the idea of sending a decorated card carrying messages of goodwill was entirely new. The first card, commissioned by Henry Cole, featured a family raising a toast in the center, with scenes of charity and kindness on the sides. The card was gentle, warm, and accessible, and people adore it. Soon, printing presses across Britain produced cards in endless styles: snowy landscapes, quiet cottages, robins perched on branches, children at play, families gathering by the fire, or humorous illustrations meant to evoke laughter. For Victorians, sending a Christmas card became a gesture of connection, a way to reach across distance and say, "You matter to me during this season." Alongside cards came Christmas crackers, invented by Tom Smith, a London confectioner. Inspired by French bonbons wrapped in paper, he added a tiny explosive snap, turning the treat into a small, delightful surprise. When two people pulled the cracker apart, it would pop open with a cheerful sound, revealing candies, trinkets, jokes, and the now iconic paper crown. These crowns, symbolizing light-hearted royalty, became a staple of Victorian table gatherings, encouraging families to share laughter and moments of playful fun. Imagine a Victorian family seated at a long table draped in linen, candles flickering in tall holders, holly wreaths placed as centerpieces. The patriarch and child pull a cracker with a loud pop. Laughter erupts. A tiny toy soldier tumbles out along with a folded joke. Someone reads the joke aloud. The paper crown is placed on a head, tilting slightly as the wearer smiles sheepishly. These small, charming rituals were the heartbeat of Victorian Christmas, simple, joyful, unpretentious moments that softened the sharp edges of daily life. But perhaps the most influential Victorian contribution was the rise of sentimental storytelling, a movement that shaped not only Christmas, but the emotional landscape of winter itself. And at the center of this storytelling renaissance stood Charles Dickens. Dickens understood something profound. Christmas was not just a date, it was a feeling. A reminder of compassion, generosity, forgiveness, and the quiet hope that people can become better versions of themselves. His stories, especially A Christmas Carol, did more than entertain. They reshaped how society viewed the season. Through Ebenezer Scrooge's transformation from coldness to warmth, from isolation to connection, Dickens articulated a truth that people longed to hear, that the heart can be renewed in winter, that kindness is powerful, that no one is beyond redemption. Victorian families read Dickens aloud by the fire. They embraced the values he celebrated: charity, reflection, generosity, and emotional openness. The holiday became a time to visit the poor, help neighbors, make donations, and extend kindness beyond one's home. This emotionality spread into every corner of Victorian Christmas. Families exchanged thoughtful presents, handmade gifts, books, small toys, practical items tied with ribbons. Homes were decorated with greenery, holly on mantelpieces, ivy draped across banisters, mistletoe hung with a hint of romance. Music filled the air as families sang carols that blended old melodies with new harmonies. Children performed recitations or small plays. Couples shared quiet moments by the fire. Elderly relatives told stories of winters past. And through all these moments, an atmosphere of tenderness grew. Even the idea of Christmas as a season of family unity blossomed during this time. Before the Victorian era, the holiday had often been more public than private. But Victorians emphasized the home cozy, intimate, filled with warmth. Winter became a time to draw inward, not in isolation but in closeness. The fireside became the symbolic center of the season. What makes the Victorian transformation so enduring is that it did not discard the past, it refined it. The ancient traditions of greenery, light, storytelling, generosity, and communal warmth were still there, but they were shaped into a gentler, more structured celebration that felt deeply human. A holiday that blended faith, family, ritual, and nostalgia. And as the Victorian era progressed, these traditions traveled far. They crossed oceans with immigrants, appeared in newspapers and illustrated magazines, and became staples of households across the Western world. By the late 1800s, Christmas had become something recognizable across continents, a season of beauty, warmth, giving, and shared joy. The Victorian reinvention of Christmas was not about extravagance. It was about creating a moment in time when the world softened. A moment when people remembered their better selves. A moment when families, regardless of wealth, could create magic simply by gathering together, decorating a tree, exchanging cards, cracking paper crowns, or sharing a story by firelight. Today, when we decorate a tree, hang a card, pull a cracker, read a seasonal story, or simply sit quietly by a warm light in winter, we are living inside the Victorian legacy, a legacy built for comfort, connection, sentimentality, and the gentle renewal of the spirit. And it reminds us that the modern holiday, no matter how busy or commercialized the world becomes, still carries a tender core, the desire to belong, to give, to remember, and to celebrate what makes human life warm and meaningful. As our long journey continues through the unfolding story of winter traditions, we find ourselves approaching one of the most recognizable figures of the modern season, someone so familiar that his image feels woven into childhood memories, music, stories, and the soft glow of holiday lights. Yet behind this jolly figure in red lies a history that is surprisingly vast, layered, and ancient. Santa Claus did not simply appear. He is the final shape of a 1,000-year blending of myths, legends, saints, winter spirits, and cultural imagination. And like every part of the holiday, he grew slowly, shaped by the needs, hopes, and dreams of different generations. To understand him, we must begin long before there were reindeer, chimneys, or sleigh bells, and look toward a very old figure, St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas was a 4th-century bishop from Myra in what is now Turkey. He lived during a time when kindness was a form of resistance, when generosity mattered more than spectacle. His reputation grew from quiet acts, helping the poor, leaving anonymous gifts, offering food to families struggling through harsh winters, protecting children, and standing up for people who had no voice. Over time, these small acts transformed into legends. Stories told of miracles, of coins tossed secretly into windows to save families from hardship, of Nicholas appearing in the night to offer comfort. By the Middle Ages, St. Nicholas had become one of the most beloved saints in Europe, especially in colder regions where winter brought not only beauty but hardship. Children placed their shoes outside on the night associated with him, hoping to find small surprises, fruit, nuts, sweets, or tiny tokens. Households shared stories of his generosity, and entire towns celebrated him with parades, songs, and devotional rituals. He was not yet Santa Claus, but he was the seed, a giver, a protector, a symbol of winter kindness. But while St. Nicholas shaped the spirit of Santa, his appearance and magical qualities came from somewhere older Norse mythology, particularly the figure of Odin. Odin in ancient stories was a complex, powerful god associated not only with wisdom and poetry, but also with the winter sky. During the darkest nights of the year, he was said to ride across the heavens on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, leading the wild hunt, a spectral procession that swept through the winter world. In some regions, children would leave straw or food for Sleipnir, hoping Odin would reward their kindness with gifts instead of allowing winter's mischief to touch their homes. The parallels are clear: offerings to a mystical winter traveler, gifts left behind, a sense of awe and mystery. These stories traveled across time, eventually blending with Christian customs rather than disappearing. Then there is Sinterklaas, the Dutch figure who stands at the crossroads of many traditions. He was directly based on St. Nicholas, but carried with him the echoes of older winter myths. Dressed in bishop's robes, he arrived by boat from distant lands, traveling with a white horse and leaving gifts in shoes. Dutch settlers brought Sinterklaas to the American colonies in the 1600s, where his name Sinterklaas began to shift phonetically into Santa Claus. But even then, he did not resemble the figure we know today. He was slimmer, more solemn, more priestly, and his appearance varied widely from one region to another. Meanwhile, in England, another figure existed alongside him, Father Christmas. Father Christmas was not originally associated with gift-giving. He was the embodiment of merriment itself, a tall, bearded figure dressed in green robes, symbolizing the abundance and joy of the season. He represented feasting, hospitality, warmth, and togetherness. Over time, as English traditions blended with continental customs, Father Christmas merged quietly with St. Nicholas and Sinterklaas, giving the emerging Santa his warmth, his cheer, and his connection to communal celebration. As centuries passed, each thread wove deeper into the holiday tapestry. The figure that would become Santa Claus slowly began to acquire familiar traits, shaped not only by folklore but by artistic imagination. In the early 1800s, American writers like Washington Irving and Clement Clarke Moore added new details. Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, famously described a jolly, elf-like figure arriving in a sleigh pulled by reindeer, slipping down chimneys, filling stockings, and laughing with infectious joy. This poem reshaped the character dramatically. Santa became rounder, warmer, more playful, and more magical. He became the companion of children, the symbol of wonder. Then illustrators brought him to life visually. Artists like Thomas Nast, in the late 1800s, drew Santa with a full beard, round belly, large boots, fur-trimmed red garments, and a workshop at the North Pole staffed with helpers. These images spread rapidly through newspapers and magazines, solidifying Santa's appearance across an entire nation. By the early 1900s, Santa Claus had become iconic. But one more influence cemented his modern image: commercial art, especially the illustrations created for winter advertising in the 1930s and 1940s. These portrayals emphasized warmth, friendliness, and human emotion. They positioned Santa not as a mythic figure or religious symbol, but as a global ambassador of joy, kindness, and giving. From then on, Santa's red suit, rosy cheeks, twinkling eyes, and snowy North Pole home became the standard across the world. And yet, behind this familiar figure so cheerful, so instantly recognizable, rests a history shaped by centuries of longing. Santa Claus is not just one character. He is many characters blended together. A saint whose acts of quiet generosity inspired hope. A god who rode the winter sky. A Dutch traveler carrying stories from across the sea. An English spirit of merriment. An American symbol of childhood wonder. And above all, the embodiment of something deeper, the desire for a moment of magic in the heart of winter. Today, Santa is present not only in homes or stories, but in a feeling. When lights twinkle against dark December nights, when children whisper their wishes, when families gather to wrap gifts, when acts of kindness fill the season, Santa's spirit is there. Not as a literal figure creeping across rooftops, but as the emotional echo of every winter story that came before him, stories of generosity, warmth, protection, and imagination. He has become a bridge between ages, a reminder that wonder is timeless, that giving brings joy, that the darkest nights are when magic is needed most. And when we picture Santa Claus smiling, gentle, glowing with warmth, we are truly picturing the history of winter itself. Ancient rituals, sacred generosity, mythic journeys, joyful celebrations, and the soft human desire to believe in something bright when the world grows cold. As our long winter journey approaches its final chapter, we step gently into the present, into a world glowing with lights, humming with music, wrapped in ribbons, and alive with countless traditions that stretch across cultures, continents, and generations. Modern Christmas feels abundant, layered, familiar, and yet entirely unique, depending on where you stand. It is a holiday shaped not by a single origin, but by a convergence of countless threads: ancient fire rituals, medieval feasts, Victorian sentimentality, immigrant customs, folklore, art, and the tender human need to make the coldest nights feel warm. Walk through the world in December, and you will see how Christmas has become a global mosaic. Every culture adds its own colors, textures, flavors, and rhythms. In one country, the holiday is defined by lanterns glowing in windows. In another, by outdoor markets selling hand-carved ornaments. In another, by seaside gatherings or summer sunshine. In another, by quiet evenings at home. Everywhere you look, the holiday carries a distinctive shape, but behind its differences lies something shared, timeless, and universal. In many places, the winter season begins with decorations, twinkling lights draped across balconies, wreaths hung on doors, evergreen trees rising proudly in living rooms, glowing ornaments reflecting the room's warmth. These decorations are more than aesthetic. They are symbols layered with history. The lights echo ancient fires calling the sun home. The evergreens carry the memory of Yule forests. The ornaments, delicate and luminous, echo the handmade treasures of Victorian parlors. Yet the way each family decorates is deeply personal, tied to their own stories and traditions. Step inside homes around the world, and you will find the same holiday expressed through different textures. Some kitchens fill with the smell of cinnamon and baked apples. Others with roasted meats, gingerbread, or spiced drinks. Some families gather around grand tables for elaborate feasts. Others share simple meals, lovingly prepared. Some traditions highlight sweetbread loaves with citrus and nuts. Others celebrate with seafood, rice dishes, noodles, or soups. Food becomes a language through which love is spoken during the winter season. Then there are the customs that vary so beautifully from place to place. In some regions, children place their shoes by the door for small gifts. In others, stockings hang above fireplaces. In some cultures, families gather on Christmas Eve for storytelling, gift-giving, or reflection. In others, the biggest celebrations happen on Christmas morning or later in the week. Some countries have grand parades. Others have candlelit processions, bonfires, charity days, or nights filled with music and dance. Some traditions emphasize quiet spiritual contemplation. Others celebrate with fireworks and festivals. And yet beneath all these variations lies the same essential truth. People gather to lift one another's spirits in winter. The modern world has amplified these traditions with new forms of connection. Holiday films and music fill living rooms with sentimentality. Greeting cards, now both digital and physical, carry messages of warmth across continents. Social media becomes a canvas for families to share decorations, meals, and traditions. Communities organize winter events, from concerts to markets to charity drives. Schools host plays and performances. Offices exchange small gifts. Friends gather for seasonal dinners. Even strangers often greet one another more kindly, as if the season itself encourages softness. But beyond the outward expressions, what defines modern Christmas is not the variety of customs, nor the decorations, nor the feasts. It is the emotional core that has survived every era of change. That emotional core is built on light. A strand of lights wrapped around a window frame is more than a decoration. It is an echo of ancient bonfires, of Yule logs blazing in longhouses, of candlelit vigils in small chapels, of lanterns carried through medieval villages. It is a symbol of resilience, of the simple truth that people have always answered darkness with brightness. When a home glows in winter, it offers comfort not only to those inside, but to anyone who passes by, reminding them that warmth is never too far away. The emotional core is built on community. Whether it is a family gathering around a table, neighbors sharing baked goods, friends exchanging small gifts, or entire towns hosting winter festivals, the season is a reminder that humans are meant to face cold together. The earliest winter rituals, Saturnalia, Yule medieval feasts, were designed to bring people closer during the hardest months of the year. Modern gatherings continue this tradition, creating spaces where connection outweighs isolation, where kindness outweighs routine, and where shared moments feel powerful enough to soften the season's chill. The emotional core is built on storytelling. From bedtime tales told to children under blankets, to family stories passed down through generations, to the countless films, books, songs, and plays created specifically for this season, storytelling remains one of the most cherished winter rituals. People return again and again to stories of compassion, forgiveness, renewal, and magic, not because they are obligated to, but because these stories speak directly to the heart. They remind us of who we want to be. And at the heart of it all, the emotional core rests on hope. Hope that the year ahead will be kinder. Hope that relationships will heal. Hope that challenges can be overcome. Hope that warmth will return. Hope that even the smallest light can brighten a long night. This sense of hope is not naive. It is enduring. It is the same hope that guided ancient people who decorated their homes with evergreens, medieval villagers who sang through the cold, Victorians who gathered around fires to read stories, and families today who place ornaments on a tree while music plays softly in the background. Modern Christmas, with all its global variations, is ultimately a continuation of humanity's oldest winter instinct to create warmth where there is cold, to create meaning where there is uncertainty, and to create moments of beauty where the world feels heavy. And perhaps that is why the holiday feels so universal, even in places where it is not traditionally celebrated as a religious festival. Because at its core, it is a season built around values that speak to the human spirit: generosity, memory, gratitude, renewal, connection, imagination, and light. These values belong to everyone. In the modern world, busy, complicated, and sometimes overwhelming, the winter season becomes a rare pause. A chance to look at our lives gently. A chance to reconnect with loved ones. A chance to give more freely. A chance to remember that even when the year has been long, there are still moments of beauty waiting quietly for us in the final weeks. And so, when we stand in a room lit by soft lights, or sip a warm drink while watching the night fall, or exchange gifts with people we care about, we are doing something ancient. We are participating in a ritual older than any calendar, a ritual that began in firelit caves, in frozen forests, in stone villages, in Victorian parlors, and now continues in modern homes around the world. The shapes of the holiday may change, but the heart remains the same. It is the heart that whispers to us through the centuries. The light returns. We are not alone. Hope survives the winter. Come close, stay warm. Tell stories, and remember what matters. And that is the true gift of modern Christmas, not the decorations, not the gifts, not the spectacle, but the shared promise that no matter how dark the world becomes, people will always find a way to bring light to it. And now, as we come to the gentle close of this long winter journey, something becomes beautifully clear. Christmas, as we know it today, is not the creation of any single moment, any single culture, or any single belief. It is a tapestry woven from thousands of small threads. Threads of firelight glowing against ancient cave walls. Threads of evergreen hanging in the homes of people who brave the cold with quiet strength. Threads of Roman laughter spilling into the streets during Saturnalia. Threads of Norse stories whispered beneath snow-heavy skies. Threads of medieval songs drifting across frosted fields. Threads of Victorian families gathered tenderly around candlelit trees. Every rite, every song, every decoration, every story, every gesture of giving carries the memory of someone long before us who simply refused to let winter feel empty. And that is the legacy we inherit each year. Not a holiday made of dates and obligations, but a season built on something deeply human. Our need for warmth, for connection, for beauty, for meaning, for the reassurance that even in the coldest months, there is still light to be found. Modern Christmas, with all its colors and customs, is really a living archive of humanity's hope. A hope that has traveled across continents, crossed oceans, survived bans, adapted through eras, and transformed again and again without ever losing its gentle core. So as you finish this story, whether you are listening late at night, sitting in a quiet room, or drifting into sleep, let the season remind you of something soft but powerful. You carry the same spark that kept all those winter traditions alive. Your light matters. Your warmth matters. Your presence matters. And wherever you are, whatever your December looks like, you are part of a lineage of people who have always found ways to turn darkness into something bright. Thank you for walking through this journey with me tonight. Wishing you a peaceful season, a warm heart, and a quiet, steady glow that stays with you long after the winter fades. Good night, and see you in the next story. Crescent Moon Sparkles.